History is often taught as a series of explosions. We are taught that empires end with a bang. We imagine the barbarians storming the gates of Rome, the bombs falling on Berlin, or the guillotine dropping in Paris. We are conditioned to believe that the end of a superpower is a loud, violent, and obvious event that happens on a specific day in a specific year. But this is a lie. This is a theatrical version of history, designed to keep you watching the horizon for an army that will never arrive while you ignore the termites eating the floorboards beneath your feet. The truth is that most empires do not die by murder, they die by suicide. More specifically, they die because their architects decide to dismantle the building and sell the bricks before the roof collapses. We are currently witnessing the final stages of the American empire, but if you are waiting for a sudden crash, a single day where the stock market goes to zero and the dollar becomes worthless, you are looking for the wrong pattern. You are looking for the Roman pattern. You should be looking for the Dutch pattern. In the 18th century, the Dutch Republic was the envy of the world. They possessed the global reserve currency, the strongest navy, the most advanced financial system, and the highest standard of living in human history. They were the masters of the universe. Yet over the course of 50 years, they slowly, quietly, and methodically ceased to be a superpower. They did not lose a catastrophic war that destroyed their homeland, nor did they suffer a plague that wiped out their population. Instead, they suffered from something far more insidious. Their elite class, the merchants, the bankers, and the politicians, realized that there was no more growth to be had at home. They realized that the cost of maintaining the empire was higher than the profit it generated. So they made a cold, calculated decision. They decided to export their wealth. They decided to lend their capital to their enemies. They decided to financially dismantle their own nation to preserve their own fortunes. They exited the empire before it fell. To understand what is happening to the United States today, to understand why the stock market hits all-time highs while the bridges rust and the middle class evaporates, we must look at the blueprint of how a hegemonic power hollows itself out. It is the story of how a nation of producers becomes a nation of speculators, and how a ruling class separates its own destiny from the destiny of its people. During their golden age in the 1600s, the Dutch were the workshop of the world. They were innovators who perfected physical shipping, mastered wind energy, and focused on hard assets and hard work. This intense productivity created a massive surplus of capital. The Dutch guilder became the world reserve currency because everyone wanted Dutch goods. But success breeds a specific type of cancer. As the Dutch became wealthier, wages rose, and the standard of living skyrocketed. It became expensive to build things domestically compared to rising competitors like England and France. The labor force became comfortable and complacent. This is where the pivot happens. The Dutch capital holders looked at the numbers and saw that the return on investment for building a factory at home was falling. Labor was too expensive, and regulations were too high. So they asked themselves a fatal question. Why should we go through the trouble of running physical businesses when we can simply lend money? The Dutch Republic shifted from an economy of production to an economy of finance. They stopped being the workshop of the world and became the banker of the world. This financialization is often celebrated by economists as a sign of sophistication, but in reality, it is the beginning of a death spiral. When an empire stops making things and starts making money from money, it signs its own death warrant. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange became a casino of complex financial instruments and derivatives. Numbers in ledgers went up, but the physical economy rotted. The shipyards closed, the skilled engineers died off without replacements, and the middle class fractured. The elite did not care because they had found a new host for their capital. They looked across the channel to their great rival, Great Britain, which was hungry, aggressive, and industrializing. Britain wanted to build an empire, but needed money. In the ultimate betrayal, Dutch bankers began to lend massive amounts of capital to the British government and British corporations. They funded the very navy that would eventually blockade their ports and strangle their economy. They did this simply because the return on investment was higher. Capital has no fatherland. This is the great financial exit. The elite kept living in their beautiful canal houses, but their wealth was no longer tied to the health of the republic. They had built a lifeboat for themselves while drilling a hole in the hull of the ship for everyone else. Fast forward to the United States of America. We are living through the exact same cycle. The United States had its golden age of production from 1945 to 1970, acting as the workshop of the world. The dollar was king because American industry was king. But when wages rose and the rest of the world caught up, the American elite made the exact same pivot. In the 1980s and 90s, manufacturing was discarded as old-fashioned. The future was declared to be services and finance. The physical economy was dismantled, and factories were shipped overseas to access cheap labor. Wall Street replaced Detroit, and the derivative replaced the physical widget. Just as in Amsterdam, the stock market soared, and the elite celebrated their genius, but they were merely burning the furniture to heat the house. This financialization created a massive surplus of capital at the top that couldn't go into American factories or low-return infrastructure. Instead, it went into funding the industrialization of China, mirroring how the Dutch funded the rise of Britain. American financial elites built factories in Shenzhen and transferred technology detached from the fate of the American nation. Today, if the United States economy hits a recession, global corporations and massive asset managers do not fail. They own assets in every currency and jurisdiction. They have executed their financial exit. This economic hollowing out mirrors a deep societal polarization. In the late 1700s, the Dutch entered the decadent periwig era, where the rich retreated into insulated high society while the poor descended into squalor and unrest. America today has its own version of this distraction, with a culture obsessed with celebrity and identity politics, keeping the population fighting over cultural issues while the economic foundation rots. While the people are distracted, the elite move value out of the vault. In the final stages of the Dutch Republic, the state took on massive amounts of debt to maintain the illusion of power, borrowing from its own wealthy citizens. This created a perverse system where the wealthy elite benefited from state debt, as interest payments acted as a wealth transfer from the taxpayer to the bondholder. The modern American system functions similarly. The middle class pays taxes or suffers inflation, while value is siphoned off to feed a passive economy of debt holders. Eventually, the host begins to die and the currency loses trust. For the Dutch, the illusion shattered in 1780 during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, when they realized their navy was a hollow shell and the Bank of Amsterdam was insolvent. The United States is approaching a similar moment with skyrocketing federal debt and massive unfunded liabilities. The elite recognize that the math cannot work forever, so their strategy is the great detachment, converting paper wealth into hard, tangible assets like farmland, energy, and private infrastructure. Furthermore, the migration of capital has moved to the digital realm. The billionaire class and major financial institutions are building bridges to blockchain systems and network ledgers, preparing for a day when the US dollar loses its global status. When that day comes, the standard of living for the average citizen will face a severe correction, while the elite will remain protected by owning the scarce underlying assets of the new world. The tragedy of this pattern is normalcy bias. Up until the very end, the average citizen believes their nation's exceptionalism exempts them from the laws of economic gravity. This hubris acts as an anesthesia while the physical nation is cannibalized. The money that should be maintaining critical infrastructure is instead used for stock buybacks and servicing debt. Cultural ambitions shift from building and inventing to passive speculation and passive income. But financial wealth is merely a claim on reality. It is not reality itself. You cannot eat a bond, and if the underlying production collapses, the paper is worthless. The Dutch story did not end with an apocalypse, but rather with a loss of sovereignty and a stagnating standard of living, turning a former superpower into a minor province. For a larger, more complex nation, the shift may result in extreme domestic polarization, a society of fortified wealth surrounded by widespread instability, where central governments weaken and real power moves to decentralized networks and tech platforms. When the nation-state becomes a bad investment, the investors build a new system and leave the public with the bill. To navigate this turning wheel of history, one must look past political promises, recognize the structural reality of capital flight, and focus on tangible global value before the lagging indicators of collapse catch up.